or Dr. Penman. So I've had the pleasure of working with Dr. Penman for the last 6 months or so. Basically, he's a writing consultant and coach, which means he helps grad students, postdocs, anybody else, mostly grad students and postdocs with writing assignments. There's lots of writing in grad school, as you've found out. And a lot of times it's hard on the advisor to always be managing proofreading and all the stuff that needs to happen to make a good journal paper. So he offers services to kind of mentor and coach grad students with things like weekly meetings and proofreading and acting like a reviewer for your journal paper to kind of beef it up and make it stronger before you submit. And he's been so good and helpful for my lab because I have a ton of papers that are backlogged in my pipeline that have to get out before I go up for tenure. So he's been wonderful in kind of sharing that load with me and helping my grad students get their papers out on time. So I highly recommend his services. If you think you would benefit, please talk to your advisors, forward the link, try to set it up. It's really helpful and they'd probably benefit a lot too. So yeah, without further ado, I guess take it away and talk about journal article writing.
Great, thanks, Dr. Hornbossel. Let me start with just a little bit of background about myself. This is my sad and tired finishing my PhD moment with the stack of printed out pages. I did my PhD at CMU, and it was actually in the English department focusing on how people use language. So on that end, I was very highly focused on the humanities side, but on my teaching side, I was really interested in more technical things. And so after I graduated, I did 4 years teaching at Princeton in the writing program, and my theme was AI. And so I got to do a lot of more technically inclined teaching work and thinking about writing together with my students through that. And now I'm kind of a writing consultant and try to bridge the gap of where training could be, but often kind of isn't. So I want to give just a little bit of guide signposting of where we're heading. In a minute, we're going to do intros because there is going to be a little bit of interactivity here, and I think that is kind of a good way to kick that off. So, be prepared to say your name. And then the focus here really is taking the stress out of your journal article writing process. I think that's really important because it doesn't have to be as hard as it is. And let's talk about ways that we can make that happen. Overall, I'm kind of taking a very intellectual approach of, if you could just break down the problem, that's a pretty significant step towards solving it. So I've broken this into 3 different aspects. First focus point is what are structural aspects of being a grad student. So I've organized this around a kind of question-answer format. And I really want to focus in on how much writing is involved being a grad student, even in a very technical field like engineering. And my answer is a surprising amount. Not necessarily true. I guess we'll kind of get into it, but kind of want to emphasize that as a structural feature that we kind of can't get away from. And because it might be a little disturbing, I want to add a little bit of time for debriefing there. So that's going to be another kind of middle of the moment time for interaction. From there, let's shift into textual advice, and the organizing question and answer there is, why are journal papers written so strangely? And my kind of response to that, guiding a little bit of framework for you, is that because scholars are actually reading strangely, and the writing is kind of following the reading patterns. And then finally, we won't have, I think, probably too much time to get into this, but that leads into so what do I do then? And so how can you draft a scientific paper? And my kind of overarching suggestion here is that this is best done steadily, iteratively, with planning out of order. A final note, and so then we're going to wrap up just with a little bit of written reflection. Nice to meet you all. I heard a lot of people are interested in the procedural advice, and I guess I'm a little disappointed that that's not kind of the main focus, but, have me back or something and we can, work some of that out. So we're going to start with this more structural question because I think, honestly, there's not a lot of other time to be able to devote to it, and I think it's important that otherwise you just have to pick up for yourself. So I'm going to say I think there's probably a surprising amount. Has anyone, especially the first year people, been a little surprised at how much writing is involved in doing this whole science engineering thing? Go ahead, raise your hands. You can express it. And Yash, can you, what was surprising?
Okay, so the most surprising pressing aspect was to draft or to make the plan for what I have to write first.
Okay.
And then to develop content and to search for content for it.
Uh-huh. So many steps, huh?
Yes, so many steps actually.
Yeah.
And then at some point, just have a look and see that it's not falling in place, so I have to start it again.
Very frustrating process, huh? Yeah, sure. I think that's quite common for people to end up at the research article stage and not fully know what to do with it. So we're going to dive into that a little bit here. First, I want to start with some light explanation of why, and we'll get more like cynical and structural as we go on. So I'm calling this a realist perspective. In the humanities, this would probably be called a critical perspective. You could also think of it just kind of as a little bit cynical. So I would suggest there's actually 4 things of why there's so much writing, even in a science PhD program. The first reason is that publishing an article is not just a momentary step, but it's a process, and so there's actually multiple companion genres. So things can just drag out more and more because it's not one step. There's many touch points as an author in the publication process. Let's go through some of these. First, you have to initially submit, and you would think that's one button, but it's actually like 17 buttons, and includes things like, surprise, you have to write a cover letter as part of submitting. Then once you get some feedback, you have to respond to that about what revisions you're willing to make. And so here is a sample that from my very first publication. All the 2 paragraphs are just a small excerpt of me promising to do more writing. Another aspect of how there's companion genres is then there's copy editing. And even if you're not doing that yourself, of checking the typos and the punctuation and so on, that involves responding to other people. So here I got some feedback still on that first article on, Will, your first 3 citations need some work. And here I was gradually checking off, okay, I did this, I did this, I did this. And then there's also actually addressing the very small changes, in red, but can only select, and so on. So there's some companion genres, and then at the tail end, I think it's important to remember, often you want to have people read it. So even if it's as simple as tweeting out, I always find that kind of stuff agonizing. So here, already beyond the article itself, we have so many aspects and touch points, where as the author, you have to do more writing. There's a second aspect here of multiple companion genres, and that's that you're also, as a grad student and emerging expert, on the other side, being asked to do some writing as part of reading. So peer review for PhD students means your peers and can even include you. So here it is, one of my first reviews that I ever wrote. So again, there's more writing involved kind of around what you might think of as like the actual writing. So that's the first aspect. Second aspect of why is there so much writing, and now we're kind of going like a level deeper here, is that reading and writing is itself one component of doing the science. So Yash touched on this a little bit when he said, I had to do a whole literature review search. And sometimes that feels like you're just like checking off an assignment or something, but there are ways where that can actually be formative of the entire project. So let me highlight 2 of those. Sometimes existing scholarship actually helps determine what you are yourself doing. You can follow somebody else's method, or you can realize, I'm going to need additional evidence if I'm going to make a certain claim. And relatedly, sometimes you read something and you say, there's an aspect of my project that has value that I wasn't even tapped into. So let me give you one example from someone who I have worked with. This is part of kind of a reading report that he put together. And the problem is that he's discovered something kind of counterintuitive. Maybe the analysis will have it float away, but in the process, he needed to figure out how counterintuitive is this result. How possible is it? Or will everyone just argue with him? And so in the process of this, you can see these 2 lines. He was noticing that actually, I have this flue gas stream line highlighted from each of these, because that was a difference from the conditions in his experiment. And so this is something where reading existing literature actually might form part of his evidence gathering itself. So just kind of one example there. But there's another aspect where reading and writing is the science, and that's coordinating with your collaborators. That is doing the thing. Hey, can you send me the chart? I really need it by Tuesday. I wrote some text. What do you think of it? Does that accurately describe the chart? When are we going to turn in this paper? All of those things are kind of the science, but they go under the radar. And so if you're not expecting to have to do them, you can be kind of caught off guard. Third aspect is that large projects invite a lot of accountability. Now we're starting to get a little bit more kind of cynical here, because this is a very polite way to put it. Another way to put it is that nobody trusts you, and you have to do a lot of writing to show that you're not going to screw things up. The reason why is because on one hand, you are being directly and indirectly, as a PhD student, given a lot of money. In fact, if you want kind of a heuristic, you could think of $500,000 as what's necessary for a professor to have come in grants in order to fund a PhD student's journey for 5 years. And you say to yourself, I'm not getting $500,000 in 5 years. That's because there's a lot of other expenses that get taken off the top. Pitt takes half of it, just straight off. You get 500, they're like, thank you, we'll take the 250. I hope you enjoy the classroom and the office and whatever else. The fundraising to have the beautiful buildings and so on. So that's half of it gone, right? Next, you get kind of your actual salary, and so that's much different than being a master's student or an undergrad where you are the one paying, and the PhD situation, you are being paid. Okay, so that's going to come out of it. Then there are tuitions and fees. Well, you aren't paying that, but the grant is paying for it in the background. And then there's, you want to go to a conference a little bit. Okay, fine. Total all that up. That's a lot of money that someone is on the hook for you, and so let's get you writing to make sure you're not going to screw this up. Propose what you want to do. Report on exactly what that's going to look like. Here is just one small fragment of a report that says back to the funders, we're not messing it up. Right? So much writing involved in showing that you're doing okay. There's another aspect. You're not just given money, kind of a small amount directly and a lot more indirectly. You're also being given time. So much time, it feels like, right? Well, no one really trusts you with the time either. So let's have you do some extra writing, like a proposal partway through, to make sure that you're doing really the thing that I want you to do. Or every week we have a lab meeting. Hey, you need to present, because I am not sure how much you're sleeping and Netflixing versus modeling. Or you get to the end of it, and it's not 5 years, here's a check mark, enjoy your time. It's let's do a rigorous written defense and then an oral presentation, right? So again, this is a situation. Did you want to chime in?
Can I just add the qualifying exam to that list, which is the most ridiculous?
Oh yeah, please, thank you. So yeah, this can be non-exhaustive, right? Mm-hmm. So here we have an element where one of the reasons why there's so much writing is because you're on a large project. That's where the money comes from, but it also means that's where some of your writing has to go to. Final aspect, I actually want to set this up because I'm not sure this will be intuitive. Let's do an interlude here with a little bit of a game. We're going to have a role, and then I want us to play out how you could imagine it a little bit cynically of what the kind of real product is. So let's start easy. An electrician as a role, I would say the product that the electrician is doing is laying wires and fixing them. Okay. Machine learning for drug discovery. What's like the product? Well, maybe you never have one, honestly. The product is spinning it to the VCs. But if you have kind of an income stream beyond that, presumably the product is kind of the drug itself that you're discovering through your machine learning, right? Okay, so that's kind of the setup of the game. We're going to play a couple, and then we're going to go, what's a scientist? That's the structure here. Instagram engineer. Who wants to try it out? What's the product? Go ahead.
Trying to get likes.
Attention, clicks, engagement, likes. Great. And why is that? Because that's how the money flows in. Instagram as a company gets money from advertisers. You know the phrase, if you're not paying for it, you are the product. So that's like another, this is human attention, human clicks, right? Okay, good, great. That was like too easy for you. Let's do a little bit harder of one. You join in to a disability support nonprofit. Let's assume this is funded through people's benevolence, philanthropy, wanting to make sure that people with disabilities have support, and you're just kind of a caregiver. What are possibilities here for saying, what is the product?
Trying to make yourself feel good.
Ooh, and who's the yourself?
The caregiver.
So as a worker, maybe you have like a little bit of social capital. I like that idea. Also, though, you're not funding it. So if you were a volunteer, I'd say yes, definitely. What about in the role of being paid? Not very much for this. Let's get insights from somebody else here.
You're accountable to the state for well-being of the patients.
Nice. So if the state is a funder, then maybe kind of the product is well-being, right, of people with disabilities. I think in my imaginary setup, the main funder is philanthropy. Kind of the foundations, people with a lot of money. And so in that setup, I want to take this kind of and apply it and say that we're kind of talking about wealthy people feeling good about themselves. That's where the money comes in. That's what your product is. Are we kind of on the same wavelength of how cynical we're trying to be here? Great. What does a scientist make? A research scientist.
Oh, publications that improve the reputation of the place they're working.
Hey, I would give you a high five, but you're too far away. Right there. Right at it. Now, you may feel at an individual level like what you're producing is knowledge. But at a structural level, what you're producing can be viewed as publications. So now we're kind of in position here to explore this a little bit more in depth. Publications, from this realist perspective, are the product that scientists make. Now, how does that have to do with the amount of writing? Well, now, if you're not just discovering knowledge and that's the real job, but you're actually producing publications, then what that means is that you've been hired to write, actually. That is a better view of kind of what you are doing. And there's a phrase that captures some of this. It's a little bit of a strange phrase, but the phrase is authorship is the coin of the realm, meaning that within academia, that's the realm, the payment token, the coin, is publication/authorship. I was the first author on this, boom. That can kind of buy you things indirectly. Your reputation, your H-index on Google Scholar, all of those things lead pretty directly to jobs, hopefully to tenure, to special talks, and in turn, the fundraisers get something out of that indirectly as well. They get reputation, social capital, maybe steering the ship of what exactly is discussed. They get those capital expense indirect fees that Pitt takes off the top. And really, from this perspective, your PhD program is a job. You're not ultimately a student. You're basically just an entry-level worker who is outputting something that is written. And from this perspective, everything that you're doing can be viewed as kind of structuring that. Why are you going to this duration of an experiment and setting it up in this order and going in so far but no further? Well, it's because of what will be able to be published out of that. So let's debrief here, kind of pause, check in. How are you feeling about these four? As a final kind of sky is falling, notice that really none of these depend on you being a PhD student. You don't age out of them. Dr. Hornbostel, do you have less writing or more writing post-PhD?
Well,
about this?
In academia, it's still a lot. But
Yeah.
If you go into industry, probably not as much.
Totally. Right? And especially with this type of field, If you create a patent, then that's like a different off-ramp where you're maybe not paying to do publications, you're paying to like make a ton of money,
Right.
selling us a new leg or something like
And in
that.
certain tracks of engineering research, you'll be spent, like you might just be a CFD expert, for example, and just do a lot of coding or
Yeah.
experiments. So you don't necessarily do this much writing in the
Definitely.
future.
After the PhD, but within the PhD and within the academic structure, kind of locked into the system. So, how are you feeling? Stressed? Good. What else? Let's get some good emotion words here. Somebody in the back.
I'm curious too about, there's a lot of international students in the class and in grad school, and how do you feel about this sort of,
Right.
just having writing carry so much weight is probably a lot of pressure, I would imagine. Does anybody feel that?
Fear. That's a great emotion word. Good. Okay. Good. Let's spend some time here. What else? You look like you're having some deep thoughts there. What are you feeling? Stress. Anxiety. So this is ultimately the reason I've started here, is I want to amp up your stress. Because if we just started with the how-tos, it's easy to say, oh, well, once I'm done, I'm just kind of done. But unfortunately, for better or for worse, this is kind of the condition you find yourself in here. Yes?
And one thing too, I mean, to take a little stress off, ultimately it's your advisor's job to be the ultimate responsible party in this, right? So like, yes, there's a lot of writing, but also your mentor is supposed to be the one who takes responsibility in coaching you. In practice, that may not happen, but they're supposed to be doing that.
So this is great. She is already trying to help you lower the stress. It's hard to maintain and face this degree of anxiety and fear and stress. But my overall perspective is it is useful to at least engage with it. And so I want to ask, how might you own that this is part of your life right now? How have you been approaching it? Beyond just avoidance.
Trying to get help when you need it.
Okay, good one. What are your strategies here at Pitt for getting help when you need it?
Like going to office hours when you're struggling on a class.
Okay, sure. And in the PhD context, right, eventually that would transfer into hopefully you have an advisor who you can talk with. Pitt also has a pretty reasonable writing center, which is available to grad students. What other strategies? It's very noble to say, yeah, I just asked for help when I need it. What else can you do?
If I'm allowed to.
You also look like you're having some deep thoughts. What's your approach?
My approach is generally like be disciplined and write every day.
Yeah.
Even if you write a little bit, and if you're disciplined, you can get a lot done.
I like that. So that's kind of a practical strategy. It's also a just saying I'm going to do it even if I don't like it. Okay. We have time for maybe one more. Any other elements here? What can you do in the weight of the fear?
Maybe searching for some solutions or some ways.
Some solution, like quit.
Yeah. No, not quit.
Oh yeah. No. Definitely not quit.
Yeah, just like searching some ways that can help you to understand what you are working for, or the better ways you can do to improve your writing.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I have kind of brainstormed what are some common strategies, and we've hit on two of them. The final two, we've heard get assistance. Great, good strategy. Easier said than done sometimes, but good strategy. Final one as well, I would characterize what you were saying as kind of maintaining a growth mindset, if you're familiar with this. Instead of having a fragile sense of, oh no, I'm not sure if I'm good enough, saying, I don't know how good I am, let's figure it out, and it's okay for me to kind of grow and keep exploring. Let me also offer, just while we're here, a few other options. You can adjust your expectations. I think we've heard a little bit of that, more or less suck it up. I think that has like, kind of a narrow tolerance, and then once you're outside of it, it just kind of explodes. So, maybe not useful as the only strategy for encountering the fear. As someone in the humanities, I would be remiss if I didn't say, make it existential. This is just who I am for now. Or, no, this is really not what I signed up for, and I'm only 1 year in, might as well cut my ties and be done with it now. You can also, as my father-in-law says, every job has bedpans, unpleasant things that you don't want to do, and there's no more or less of that necessarily doing science than, working at a retail store or, taking the machine learning job or whatever it is. So here we've identified some stress, and now we're kind of trying to exhale. We still have two to go. You guys on board? I can pause here. Go ahead.
One little thing. I've really harped on writing groups as well, which I
Okay.
think is super helpful just to have friends who are in it with you and to remember that I'm not the only one who's in this boat. So just meeting with them, even if you're not necessarily proofreading each other's work, just to have that support group can be really helpful too.
Yeah, writing groups, I have a lot of complex feelings about those.
Okay.
So, yeah, okay. Okay, let's go in then. Question 2. Now we have a little bit more early interest. Why are journal papers written so strangely? And I'm going to say it's because people also read strangely. So let's kind of justify this here. Strange reading patterns, right? So we're going to get to writing, but via reading. Recall that reading scholarship, from what we were talking about before, is part of doing the science. It's not just a tack on at the end. And so that is work. It is not like reading novels or browsing social media or doing other entertainment. As a scientist, ultimately, you kind of read papers because you have to. Again, right, this is a kind of realist perspective. Maybe you feel like you should want to read it. I'm saying it's okay to recognize that you don't actually, most of the time. What does it mean that it's doing work? It means you're going to put in as efficient of work as you can there. After all, what you write is what I need to read. And if I'm reading because it's work, I'm going to read just to figure out, is this going to help my method? And just to figure out, is it going to help be something I can cite to say, yes, well, I've discovered the thing that's better than what they did. And so this means I have very unusual reading patterns. I will probably either skim really quickly, or I'll zoom in and focus on something for like 5 days and unpack all the equations and figure out the missing piece. So here is a funny comic to kind of express the same thing. We have the professor character. Don't worry, Cecilia. In academia, people don't read things, they go through them. And this is like a real term, so you can feel free to use this yourself. She says, what? He says, it means you may not read all of it, but the parts you did read, you read really well. And then the joke is like, well, can I do the same thing with my graduate student handbook? And he says, I don't know, I only went through it. Nice layer that the professor is a little bit out of touch there, right? Doesn't need to read the graduate student handbook, so doesn't. But the general point here is that you kind of have two modes of like skimming mode and then like, whoop, I really need this. And maybe your needs will shift as you go through a certain project. So let's look at just 3 features here. This is, just a taste of a deeper dive into how our scientific paper is structured. So I want to just isolate a few things that stand out, some things that might say, well, that's why it is the way it is. That's my hope, is that that's how you feel. These 3 are hierarchy, repetition, and dense formality. So we'll just take them one at a time. Hierarchy lets you do the zoom in, zoom out. Here's what I mean by that. I picked a article, basically at random, from one of the engineering journals that I've downloaded a lot of stuff for working with students. So here's the article. A reinforcement and imitation learning method for pricing strategy of electricity retailer with customers' flexibility. And you could definitely go through and kind of chug through this entire abstract, right, and laboriously try to figure out what is every single piece, and then painstakingly go through sentence by sentence. But we're trying to get into expert skimming mode. And what I, in my imaginary scenario here, really care about is how did they do it? I'm not even that surprised by the results. I just want to know, how did they do this? Because I thought about this problem and I just thought it was intractable. And so I zoom in and I see a demand prediction method. I say, that's the part I want. So here's where hierarchy is going to come in. I can very easily find, because it has a numbered section and a named section, which in the humanities, largely headers do not do the same work. So you have it very easy in this regard. Self-generated reinforcement and imitation method. Here's my method. Good. Well, now there's a next level of hierarchy. Do I want the background? Do I want the MDP, the Markov decision process model? None. I kind of understand both those things, right? I don't really need that. I need this contraption of a method. Now, this is a little bit ugly naming, right? But you can tell here that this is more or less what it's, the thing that I want to know. And so now I actually have another level of hierarchy. We've already gone 2 or 3 levels down. I have one more to go, which is these, now they aren't numbered, but if they were, this would be 3.3.2, right? Self-generated expert knowledge imitation learning mechanism. And now here is the true section that I need to see, and I focus in. And they say, as far as we know, there is no way to do this, thus there is no existing expert training data set. And I say to myself, exactly, that's what I've struggled with. And they say, so we just made something up with an expert knowledge imitation learning mechanism. Right? I'm kind of just giving you the flavor of it. And now I know the section, I know their broad strategy. The next couple of paragraphs are going to be giving me all the detail about it. So the hierarchy that is being written is helping me read. You seeing kind of that correspondence? And notice that as you gain expertise throughout your PhD, you will also gain expertise not just in the writing, but also in the reading. So that you can do this too, because you know where everything is and where it should be and what you expect to be there, and you know what to look for. So those are some of the skills involved in this reading, writing element around hierarchy. Let's talk about repetition. Repetition is a little bit of a legacy writing feature. I've never heard it described that way, so I hope you appreciate the turn of phrase there. But repetition is a textual strategy to manage hierarchy, and there is kind of an extra function, but it's not often used in engineering. What do I mean by managing hierarchy? Well, let's look for contrast at a Wikipedia page. Here's the Wikipedia page for carbon atmospheric capture, and you can see there's an outline which expresses this hierarchy, and then it's even indented down to 3.2.1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But each of those are hyperlinks. And so I can, within a web context, easily absorb the whole thing, and then click and boom, I'm like magically there, right? But historically, that hasn't been the case with academic writing. So you basically pretend like you're not sure where your reader is coming from. So notice, at the end of that introduction, they give us a whole paragraph that says in text, just a reminder, section 2 is going to be the model, section 3 is going to be this method, section 4 is going to be the experimental, section 5 is the future work. I call this writing move a preview. And it's great, good to know. Previews help organize for your reader, but they also organize as a legacy for not being really sure where you're going to come from. You could also, in the same way, have a summary to open up the conclusion. Who knows where they were coming from? Maybe they forgot the whole flow of your paper by the time they made it to the conclusion. So that is a big function of repetition within scholarly writing. Finally, we have some real dense and formal sentence structure. And I think, honestly, this is maybe the most fun as a PhD student because you feel so smart putting like things together, like I want to go back, a reinforcement and imitation learning method for pricing strategy of electric retailer with customers' flexibility. Boom! That's a 1600 on your SAT type title, right? That's kind of how it feels. Well, what's the function of that structurally? The function, I would say, lots of aspects. We'll examine just a couple. One reason why you do this is because if you're studying something really unusual, you want to kind of elevate it and show people you mean business. Let me show you a funny example of this. This is a real scholarly article, and it's about Dr. Seuss analysis from made-up words. And you'll see a part way in, we see, for instance, the coinage snum contains two phonemes identified in earlier research, sn and concerning phonemes in general, and it goes on, right? If you're not familiar, this is a kid's book, and this is the passage in question. From a country called From comes this drum-tummied snum. So the formality there is helpful because this is a strange thing to study, and if you wanted to say it informally, you'd say, yeah, but like, why do kids' books, why are the made-up words so funny? And this guy was like, well, I will tell you in 8,000 words. And in order to keep you reading, I will remind you that I am a very serious scholar. So that's a function. And if you study something strange, you're welcome to use it. Another function is that it brings you closer to the logical structure. And it's very quotable. So these are maybe a little more applicable in your case. Let's just look at the same example from that paper. Here is a different part of the abstract. And this is very finely formally put. The experimental results illustrate our proposed approach gains 9.71%, 3.32%, and 15.94% higher economic profits than 3 state-of-the-art pricing strategies, respectively. Respectively there is like a great English word to say, I ordered some things and I want you to kind of match them up pairwise, right? And very formal, very precise. In contrast, an informal thing is ours is just better than everybody else, right? And there's a reason why you don't say it that way. It's not to show you're serious, it's to show you too can quote from my thing and say that I got 15.94% higher than the leading one. And the respectively formulation helps me compact all of that into a sentence as opposed to like an ugly table in an abstract or something like that, right? So this is really cool, I think. There are ways of analyzing scientific papers that actually make it make sense. And the point that I want to mention here, as we kind of round the corner into how should I do this, is that each of these three actually may challenge some of the writing advice that you've been given that would work well in other contexts. For instance, you may have heard, have a really strong argument in your writing. That is good writing, is to show that you really, know what you're arguing. Well, that is really not the kind of density that academic writing likes. In fact, you need to be really careful, and hopefully, sometimes you have done a whole study only to get to the word might. So that's a piece where shifting your schema for academic writing means adopting something new. Or, how about this piece of writing advice? Don't repeat yourself. Well, I mean, kind of, but also we just talked about how you definitely should repeat yourself in very certain strategic cases. Or, make sure that things flow. Well, the hierarchy, especially with the numbers, kind of, makes you not have to do that. There was not really a lot of buildup within each of those sections because the section header is already doing some of that work. So as you begin to absorb some of the academic writing conventions that flow from your reading patterns, you may also need to create for yourself some new, templates for what good writing, good scientific writing, looks like. Okay, final couple of minutes, and then we are going to have just a few moments for reflection if you have a laptop that you can respond with. How should you draft a scientific paper? This is mostly like a different talk, right? Clearly. But I want to indicate just a few aspects here. And this is really, now we have the setup. We know that academic writing is like complicated and not going away, and also kind of unusual based on probably your previous experience. Some of my advice is instead of binge writing, to do it at the last minute. That is a tactic to help you manage your own fear of being not as perfect as you want to be. So if you wait till the last minute, you can say, well, it's out of my hands now. Right? Great strategy for managing that fear, except hard to power through 8,000 words on that fear and panic. I really don't recommend it because the negative health effects just kind of magnify, you thought it was bad staying up one night, can get pretty bad. Second aspect here is how should you think about writing? Instead of a one and done, well, this is what it is. Sayonara, good knowing you, paper. Think of your writing as an iterative process. And in fact, if you're in a creative writing field, they give you this explicitly. They have a phrase, write shitty rough drafts, which is great because it has a little bit of profanity in there. It just makes you feel like so earthy, right? Same with science writing. Write some shitty rough drafts and expect that you can come back to it. It's not in your head anymore. It's on the paper. Great. Keep going then. Next piece is with some planning. We heard earlier, it's kind of surprising, but planning is actually extremely useful. And you can do that at different levels of a paper. And then finally, this one might be surprising to you, but I do recommend that you think of writing your research article out of order. The introduction is by far the most delicate section. Don't start there. Get some momentum. Write your method. You already did it after all. Write down those pesky equations. I hate working with the LaTeX stuff, right? Get it out there. So you can really play around with the order, and that's because you've done some planning and you have a hierarchy where you know what section, subsection, subsection are you working on. That's pretty much all I have. Good luck. I want to wrap up in our last 5 minutes and hear from you. If you could pull